What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg, aka the name of the place on your screen right now. We like it a magic, and you know what? Today we're going ham with a deck that's got some serious chops. Pork chops. Is it Ilharg? Right now. And we're back, and Ziggy's here. Hey, story time, everybody. Gather around real quick, because this all started about a week ago. When I was playing some feral hogs on Arena, and I had somebody steal an Ilharg with an Agent of Treachery. And looking at the two cards together, I was like, this probably. So, with this last week, I've set about trying to make this deck actually work, and it turns out these two are as annoying together as Timon and Pumbaa. You see, one's a pig and the other one is insanely irritating. So I almost called the deck that, but I actually think, end of the day, the right name for this deck, wait for it, Hamburglar. And if the combination weren't ridiculous enough, they're pretty dumb alone. Ilharg has plenty of other creatures that can ride it in this deck, and some of them there's some pretty cool tricks with. An Agent of Treachery, once you get to 7 mana, is just hot, just threatens to turn the game around in one play. But once you do get them together, stick an apple in your opponent's mouth because they're done. Don't actually do that. That's assault. But I think the best way to prove this is just to show it to you. Because I recorded 10 games to gather clips and resources for today's video. And really, all the best stuff that I got was just Agent of Treachery and Ilharg doing things. So here's a little montage of all the crazy stuff that these cards can do together and separately. Agent of Treachery is even good on boards where your opponent barely has anything. When your opponent stumbles on lands in the early game, just take a land from them, and even though it's the ultimate jerk move, it's still going to win the game most of the time, and you really can't complain about that. But that's the whole deck, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just remember to like, subscribe before you cut the lights out. There's more. Turns out I can't just show you 7 cards and call it a day. There's actually way more deck to this deck. We need a few more creatures to begin with because Agent of Treachery can't be the only trick we have with the big pig. So let's also play 4 copies of Crackling Drake. It's that kind of party. We're not only going to play 4 copies of this because we've got plenty of spells to make this thing huge by the end of the game. There's 21 non-creature spells in this deck, instants and sorceries and whatnot, so this thing gets huge fairly quickly, draws us a card every time it comes into play, and if we have an Ilharg out, it becomes especially pesky because effectively we can just give an 8 or 9 power Crackling Drake a form of haste and draw a card every single turn, which is really nice. Even if your Crackling Drake is only like 1 or 2 power, you're still drawing an extra card every turn, and that's pretty nice. But moving on, we're also playing 2 copies of Mtg here. The parent, the Baron is back. This thing is still really good, it turns out. It seems like it's been a while since we've been playing Mtg, but do you remember when there was like 3 or 4 in a bunch of decks in Standard? Because it just is that... It's that good. Turns out, though, that with 3 mana Teferi in the format, there's fewer counterspells, fewer reasons to play stuff like this, but... I don't know about y'all, I've been seeing more counterspells these days. Not just Simic Flash, but Mono Blue making a comeback just a little bit, and even some of the Esper decks starting to play Sinister Sabotage and stuff again, so I don't know what the deal is, but me starting to play this deck coincided with a bunch of Arena players attempting to play counterspells again, so it's actually been really nice to have an uncounterable threat like this that almost always gets us at least 1 card. And if it stays out, absolutely nuts. Attacks in for 5 every turn. Not a bad creature to drop off of Ilharg. And if you haven't used any mana that turn, and why would you have in most cases, then you can cast instants and stuff during your combat step to start drawing cards and dealing damage and stuff. And remember too that the creature Ilharg puts into play stays there until the end of the turn and not just the combat step. So on your second main phase you can cast sorceries and draw cards, deal some damage, take out a couple of creatures or planeswalkers or whatever. There's all kinds of good things about pairing, so definitely play a couple of copies of this. But I didn't want to go overboard. That said, I think it's just one of the best creatures that it has in its repertoire right now. There's just one more creature in the deck. I'm going to sneak in a copy of God Eternal Kefnet. Not too bad to drop off of Ilharg, because it's a 4-power flyer, whatever, it's fine. Get that kind of extra damage in. You're effectively swinging for 10 in that case, but with 21 instants and sorceries, it's also nice to have Kefnet laying around because you're able to double up on all kinds of stuff, you know. Just making your red removal go, you know, instead of 4 damage, it now effectively can deal 8 damage in a turn is just really important a lot of the time for getting as much mileage as we can out of our removal spells. So keep that in mind. But this is also just another god, so it's really, really difficult for some decks to get around, you know, the fact that we have Ilhargs and Kefnets and uncounterable Niv Mizzets and stuff. Like, not only are we resolving threats, but once we do resolve these threats, even if they can exile them, it's not the end of their day, and that's just really effective against not only aggro decks, but also control decks. If they actually get through counterspell shields, then there's really not much they can do to keep an Ilharg or a Kefnet from just coming back over and over and over, and it kind of gives this deck a stretch against a deck type that it really shouldn't be that good against. But the remainder of the deck is all spells at this point, and honestly, it's not really that complicated. We got some red removal in the form of Shock, Lava Coil, couple of Flame Sweep in the main deck. This card has been very, very good in testing. I like that, you know, we're playing some counterspells in this deck. So on turn 3, we have the mana for it. We can leave up 3 and either have a counterspell open or have Flame Sweep open. If they don't play a spell on their turn or something, we can just Flame Sweep on the end step. And that has been actually really, really nice. So Flame Sweep, a card that I like a little bit more than I thought I would. I was just throwing it in the deck because we needed a sort of, you know, low impact sweeper for the early and mid game. And it's been great in that role, but a little bit better than I thought. Definitely warrants the 2 main deck copies. Now, as far as Lava Coil, this is just the best removal that we're going to have access to in red in this deck that we know of once rotation hits. So all 4 copies of Lava Coil go in the main as far as I'm concerned. It's especially good against stuff like, you know, Feather and other 4 toughness creatures, so long as they don't have God's Willing. It's great against Feather, and that's a deck that we're fairly bad against, I've noticed. So it's really important to have Lava Coil against all stripes of creatures, but especially some really important creatures in Standard. And Shock, it'll actually finish off a game for you sometimes if you just need a little extra hit of burn. It's good for that, but it's also especially nice for taking out Llanowar Elves right now, Paradise Druids when they tap, Incubation Druids, other mana dorks and stuff like that, but also little guys, you know, Tantristic Legionnaires and everything on down. So Shock is just a really, really nice utility card to have that can actually, you know, even if you're playing against control, it can take out a Planeswalker here and there. It's just almost never bad to see a Shock. We're also playing some counterspells in this deck, 3 copies of Quench and 4 copies of Ionize. Now, just to tell you the truth, on Arena, I'm playing 2 copies of Sinister Sabotage, 2 Ionize, because that's all I have, and I don't want to spend rare wildcards on Ionize, so there's that. But if I had my druthers, I'd play all 4 copies of Ionize. Now, sometimes the Surveil on Sinister Sabotage is nice, don't get me wrong, but again, if I had the wild cards, it'd be all about Ionize as far as I'm concerned. It's just far easier to cast for this deck, and that really makes a difference when you have to have a counterspell starting on turn 3. So, again, I'm suggesting all 4 copies of Ionize, but if you got Sabotage, just mix it up, that's totally fine. It turns out, especially if you go first, counterspells aren't that bad in this format because, yeah, they might try to play the Teferi, but they're not going to get it. And that's especially true if you got a Quench in your opening hand, because in that case, it really doesn't matter if you went first or second. They are not going to get a turn 3 Teferi. And they're not going to get a bunch of other stuff, too. There's a lot of mid-range decks in this format right now, or decks that just play like a big 5 or 6 mana Planeswalker, try to call it a day. I've run across millions of these decks on Arena in the last couple of months, and people trying to get ready for rotation seem to mostly be playing like big Planeswalkers and such. And these 3-mana counterspells are just really, really effective against those, but so is Quench. You know, if they're just trying to tap out on turn 4, 5, 6, or whatever, play a Planeswalker, so long as it's not Chandra Awakened Inferno, you're in the money. Quench has actually been really effective all the way into the later turns for me. But to finish off the spell count here, and I'll stop babbling, we got 2 copies of Anticipate and 2 Chemister's Insight, and I actually think Anticipate is probably the softest slot in the deck, although I really would like to keep one of these in here no matter what. I still think that we don't necessarily need this. I only put Anticipate in to fill out the 2-drop slot. Sometimes it'll even help you find an extra land at the end of your opponent's turn 2. That's important. The deck needs all the lands it can get. Sometimes it'll help you find that counterspell for turn 3. A lot of good reasons to play Anticipate, but I still think Again, reasonably soft slot you can do whatever you want with here, but Chemist's Insight, definitely at least 2 copies of this. This has been super juiced again, for me at the very least. Drawing 2 off of this feels really nice, and drawing 4 feels incredible, and by the way, works really well with Kefnet like it always has, because you can effectively get 6 cards off of 1 Chemist's Insight, and the first one comes at a discount. It's just an insane card to this day, and it's just, we're basically a control deck at heart, kind of a mid-range control hybrid. Interesting things we're doing here, but for the most part, we're still a control deck that's playing the first few turns untapped and ready for what our opponent's giving us. So Chemist's Insight is still a great card to play on turn 4 if they didn't do anything for you to react to. Just going to put you way up on cards by the end of things, help you find the important pieces you need, like that agent, for instance. Now, we're running 25 lands in this mana base. We got 17 blue sources, 16 red sources. As far as, getting the mana that we need, it hasn't been too much of a problem, although there are times when I wouldn't mind a 26th land in this deck, because we're trying to get to like 6 for Niv Mizzet, 5 for Ilharg, 7 for Agent, if we're not getting it off of Ilharg, and we're trying to make sure that we have 3 lands on turn 3 no matter what, so we can ionize something. I mean, we really need our lands in this deck, so I'm thinking about dropping an Anticipate, bumping it up to 26 lands. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's my take. And as far as the Blast Zone, this is just nice to have an extra sweeper on occasion, especially against the aggro decks that will swarm us early. But here's our sideboard right here, and this is actually fairly simple, but there is some spicy stuff in here, We've got Negate, that seems fairly standard. You're going to be taking out the Lava Coils, putting in the Negate against most control matchups. Aether Gust, also pretty decent. Sometimes against mid-range matchups especially, but even against aggro matchups, there's a lot of red things you want to send back to their hand, or to the bottom of their library, rather. Pardon me. As far as Fry goes, excellent against control matchups as well. So we're trying to sort of diversify our bonds here. We do all right against both aggro and control in Game 1, but we do much better in Game 2 and 3. As far as control, we've also got a Chandra to be another uncounterable 6-drop against them. Do not drop the Niv Mizzets. Just put in the Chandras, I'm telling you. And as far as the mass manipulation, we've already got Agent of Treachery in there, but I find this deck goes very, very long if it doesn't immediately play Ilharg and Agent of Treachery. This game's going to go to turn 10, 11, or more a lot of the time, and games tend to drag, so a mass manipulation is always nice, especially if you've also cited in this Scholar of the Ages. This is a neat little trick, especially late in the game with Ilharg, because if you can actually get a Scholar of the Ages down multiple turns in a row, you're just getting insane card advantage, and sometimes you'll get back that mass manipulation, but more often you're just getting counterspells to help sort of cinch things up. Now here are our power rankings. A final score of 66 when it's all said and done, and that is not bad for a $115 deck. That is the most this thing is going to cost you. It actually costs you around $100 if you get near mint stuff rather than mint stuff, so not a bad investment for a rotation-proof deck with a lot of power. I don't know if this is the best way to play Is It Drakes right now, or even if this would be better as an Arclight Phoenix deck. I don't know. You be the judge of that, but I can tell you right now, this deck is a ton. So much fun, and I think that the format is kind of trending more mid-range from what we can tell so far, and a deck like this does really, really well in a mid-range format. We've got the counterspells that play well against mid-range. Both Quench and Ionize are very good against other decks that are on a mid-range plan. Ilharg will trump a lot of other cards in mid-range decks, and once we start getting down Agent of Treachery, whether it's every turn or not, we can just steal their big threat they worked all game to actually play. So this deck is insane against a mid-range philosophy, but again, we've got gods that keep coming back, counterspells to battle their counterspells against control, uncounterable main deck spells. It's pretty decent against control, and against aggro, we have a main deck sweeper and a bunch of huge creatures to invalidate their little guys. So we've got decent game. Like I said, I played 10 games to gather clips for this deck, and I played a lot more outside of that, but just in the 10 games we played on camera, we won 8 of those. We lost a whole 2 games, one because we were mana screwed, and the other we lost to a feather deck. Not gonna lie to you, it can be a bad matchup. But the power is there, as evidenced by this jacked power score. I think it does deserve an 8. Agent of Treachery, anyone who's ever played with the card can tell you, is just a crazy, it should not be allowed to be a magic card, especially in this context. You put it together with Ilharg, which again is already a super powerful card, and it's just like through the roof, the disgusting, actually unfair things you can do with the 2 cards together. But aside from that, we got Crackling Drake, Kefnet, Niv Mizzet, a bunch of really cool counterspells, some decent red removal. I mean, the power level really is there in this deck. Speed's a different story, not exactly on point in that regard. Sometimes, even if we can play a Kefnet or an Ilharg or a Crackling Drake, we will hold off and let our opponent try for the home run, just so we can ionize it and slap that Ilharg down next turn. So, even in games where you could just play an Ilharg, start going to town, it's sometimes not the safest bet to do that, because it'll leave your counter shields down. So a lot of games are going to drag with this thing, and speed is not exactly our department. You would think the synergy in this deck would be a little bit higher, but at least we're above average here. Yeah, there's synergy between not only Ilharg and Agent, but Ilharg and Crackling Drake, too. Drawing a card every turn. That's telling you, that's what you want to be doing in a game of Magic. And there's synergy because we got Crackling Drake and like 21 spells, so that's kind of synergy, but for the most part, it's just a pile of good cards that happen to work together, rather than a pile of cards that work together and are also good. The deck is pretty versatile, I've already talked about. We have decent game against every major archetype, although I imagine combo decks would cook our goose if we don't have the proper counterspells. Cook our goose? What am I talking about? I'm keeping it. Anyway, as far as versatility goes, we do have some decent early game red removal we can clean up the early board states with, and we do have some counterspells that can, they have good game against almost anything. Resiliency is also above average in this deck because, again, the early game is not really where we thrive, and we might have to take some lumps there, and get down to like 6, 8, 10, something like that, and then turn the game around. A play like Ilharg into Agent of Treachery usually will do just that almost no matter what the opponent's board state is, so if that's not resiliency, I don't really know why this category exists. Offense is shockingly low for what we're doing, but we're really only playing 14 creatures in the deck, and like none of them come down until turn 4, so it doesn't matter. It's just not. We are not a super offensive deck, especially in the turns where offense is determined. Like turn 1 through 4, we don't do anything sometimes. Like I've played games against Grixis and Esper where literally no one does anything until turn 6. So we're not really built for the early turns unless we're responding to things. So yeah, again, offense not super high, even though we're playing like a giant 6/6 pig god. Defense, on the other hand, pretty high. It turns out that not only do we have that red removal and those red-blue counter spells and stuff like that, but Agent of Treachery, turns out, is just it's a removal piece. Effectively, if we let something slip through the cracks, or they had too much mana for us to quench it, or the creature is too big for us to kill with a lava coil or something like that, like Agent of Treachery can come along and we just have that thing instead, which is better than removal. Even if they get rid of your Agent of Treachery, you still keep the thing. I mean, you saw games where we stole boluses, we stole Teferis, you can steal giant creatures with this. It's just really not a problem. So again, if something did slip through the cracks or went over your removal, Agent of Treachery will usually take care of that for you if the game goes long enough. So the defense is pretty dang high in this deck. Now, Game 1 and Games 2 and 3 are more or less the same in my eyes. We can adjust to just about any mainstream deck right now because we got plenty of tools against the control decks in the format and the slower going decks. A couple of home runs against them like mass manipulation, but against aggro decks and the stuff that's trying to kill us a little bit faster, we got some tools on the sideboard there too. And I feel like our main deck is already tuned enough to be decent in just about any matchup that after boards we get especially good. So although I can't give it a higher score after boards, I feel like it's at least the same. Now, as far as the consistency, give it an 8. Pretty high in this deck. We don't have too many mana problems. We got Anticipate, Chemist's Insight, Crackling Drake. They all draw cards for us. That's really nice. But of course, there are going to be games where you don't get Ilharg, you don't get Agent of Treachery, like you don't see either one some of the time. And when the deck occasionally doesn't do the thing it's supposed to be doing, I guess you can't really call that consistency, but for the most part, the deck is always going to be doing something good, and even if you never see a pig or an agent, you can still do, kill that guy, counterspell that, Crackling Drake, that's a good, it turns out that's just going to be a good playline every time. So even if you're just effectively playing a version of Is It Drake's, it turns out that's pretty consistent. And again, all this adds up to a price that's like not budget, $100 or a little higher than that. I cannot call it budget, but like it is way better than you're going to be doing on a lot of decks in the upcoming standards. So really want you to give this one a shot if you can. It's not going to win every game for you, but it won just about every game for me, at least in the testing period, and beyond that too. I've been playing this deck since last Friday, and it's had a really good win percentage, and it has generated more nices than just about any deck that I've played all season. I don't know what the deal is with that, but as soon as you drop an agent off of an Ilharg, I've gotten a nice nice, what, like 40% of the time? That's a really high percentage. So if you want some nices on Arena, check this deck out. But it's a lot of fun to play in paper too. So make sure you hit the link in the description. Go over to TCG Player and check out this deck. Order any pieces that you need from the cheapest place to get it. So this thing is super fun to take out for a spin. I could have made that like a spit joke, like roasting a thing, taking it out for a spin. Just cranking it. I've been looking for a good spit joke all video, and I can't figure it out. I know that I miss like a ton of like bacon puns and stuff. Like this deck has a lot of pros and cons. You know, there are things I miss. Make sure you like, subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and check out the Patreon if you want to determine what we do around here. We vote on stuff like 3 times a week over on the Patreon, and it's just $1 to get involved in that action, and I'll let you know what we're doing before we even do it. It's good to have information. If being a Magic player's taught you nothing else, it should have taught you that. Oh, why didn't I do a "they call me Mr. Pig" joke? That was sitting right in front of me. I got the shirt on. I dropped the ball in a couple of puns here, but I feel like the Hamburglar pun is strong enough to just, I can ride that out for the entire video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one, because I did. This is kind of a spur of the moment idea that just was going to be a meme deck, but memes turned into dreams this time around. This deck was way better than I thought it was going to be, so hope you have a chance to give it a shot, and I guess that I have to stop talking now. Can you tell I don't want to? I want to go on and on about this deck, but anyway, I think I should probably be done. Just let me know any questions or concerns in the sideboard down there, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love, and be kind.